Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hey everyone, today I'm talking with David Savage about his book, The Savage Path, a memoir of modern masculinity. The book takes the reader deep inside his world through intimate stories of his challenges and successes as he humbly navigates the journey of being a man in today's world. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on David Savage. David grew up as an Air Force brat in West Texas with a deep and rich scouting background, beginning with the Cub Scouts and achieving the rank of Eagle Scout and earning the bronze, silver, and gold palms. Then establishing and leading a high-adventure explorer post before heading to Texas A&M University to study engineering. David has a passion for history and geopolitics, which he has enriched through global job-related travel and extensive reading. He and his wife Kimberly have been married for 18 years and live in Katy, Texas. They blended their families and raised 4 children, now grown. David has also written hundreds of poems and was the official roaster-in-chief at many company promotion and retirement events, all in verse. His rich sense of humor has been displayed as an amateur at the Comedy Workshop in Houston and winning the Star Search contest in Chicago back in the late 80s. David has been a lifelong backpacker and outdoorsman and has been blessed to have a group of 5 older advisors who call themselves the Six Pack. They have backpacked for 25 years together to provide some of the rich and humorous stories he shares throughout his memoir, The Savage Path. You can learn more about David and his work by visiting his website at thesavagepath.com. Well, hi, David. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thank you very much. How are you doing, Sherry?
Great. I'm excited to talk to you. Why don't you kick it off for us by telling us a little bit about your book, The Savage Path, a memoir of modern masculinity.
Okay, well, first, it's a memoir. It's my personal life experience story. The thread throughout the book is my belief that all men share 3 common purposes. We all must find a will to obey, and God's will is best in my opinion, find a work to do, and find a woman to love. And so that's the thread that runs through the whole book. Now, I use a backpacking metaphor to describe my journey through the wilderness in pursuit of these goals, hence the title, The Savage Path, with my last name.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a lifetime of backpacking experience and stories, which are used in some of the chapters. And I wanted the book to be humorous and easily readable to make it entertaining, but I also wanted there to be a little moral at the end of each chapter of life's little lessons. And, my hope is that others might learn from my experiences. And, I didn't try to explicitly connect the dots. I believe the readers are intelligent enough to do that. But there's little nuggets there of wisdom for those who have ears to hear.
Mm-hmm. So it's a memoir, but it's a self-help as well, would you say?
Yeah. I spoke with another author who is at our church, and he wrote Sacred Marriage, Gary Thomas, and I spoke with him before I began the book. And, and he said, well, really, it's like a men's ministry book, but it's also a memoir, and it's also humorous writing like Dave Barry. And he goes, that's kind of a hybrid. And that can be a little confusing when people are trying to find your book, especially with all this keyword stuff. Mm. But yes, it is. I want people to leave, with an entertaining read, but also, having learned something, and that's why it's kind of targeted to men, mm-hmm. to younger and older men.
Mm-hmm. I'm always curious about what makes people sit down and write a book. Can you tell us a little bit about what your journey looked like?
Yes. So I had decided to retire from a 31-year career, in the energy industry, had a global job. My mother and my brother were both in memory care facilities, and I was responsible for their affairs. And so I knew that they were going to pass away soon, and they did in 2019. So I had retired at the end of 2018. And then, I had this huge scouting influence in my life. I was an Eagle Scout. I got on my palms. I started my own high adventure backpacking Post. Then I worked at Philmont as a ranger. And
Wow.
so the genesis or the kernel, the idea came from my grief over what has happened to the Boy Scouts of America. I believe that's the best organization for preparing young men for productive manhood that has ever existed, from my experience with it. And then a second and equally passionate motivation, was my experience as a father to my son and my two stepsons. So all three were denied full access to their biological fathers through their teen years due to divorce. And, I felt bad about that. And then I saw what gaps, that creates, at a critical age for young men trying to determine what kind of man they want to be, and they're not living with their dad.
Right.
So, divorce wasn't really my idea, but I was responsible for who and how I chose to marry. And, I would suggest that, who you marry is one of the most important decisions in any man or woman's life. And the sad fact is there's almost no one is providing guidance on that decision or explaining how fulfilling and joy-filled a good marriage can be. There's not a lot of people that are talking about, hey, it's great, you should get married. So, the promise to the reader in my book is to try to deliver training examples, like coping tools and additional resources to teach them something through entertaining storytelling.
You just mentioned using the metaphor of a path through the wilderness, and the wilderness as being a place of danger and a place where one can get lost, and that the young American male is the creature in the most danger. What do you mean by that?
So I have two of my kind of key quotes that I love. And the first one is, a boy without a man is like an explorer without a map. Basically, he's lost, and being lost isn't a good situation to be in. The second is from Frederick Douglass, and that quote is, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
Oh, that is so true. Wow.
And so, if you look at the 2020 census, 40% of boys are growing up without an adult male in their home today due to divorce, absent fathers, and women who choose to raise children on their own. So there's 40%. Then you have the workaholic dads, the alcoholic dads. It's a high percentage of rudderless boys out there who don't really have a role model. And then, so to compound that, since the 1970s, there's been a rather aggressive assault on masculinity by, a more militant faction of the feminist movement claiming that all masculinity is toxic. And I believe that's false. I believe it does exist and it's not good. And there are some legitimate things that the feminist movement needed to do to, eliminate that and elevate themselves. And I think they've been successful, but it's kind of gone too far. And, so, in addition to this vacuum in the home of male leadership, there's also been a vacuum in pop culture of positive male role models. So sports figures like Tiger Woods, they've been self-serving and unfaithful in marriages. And some, of these athletes have even abused, their women or their wives. Then you've got these beer commercial idiots. You got movies like Dumb and Dumber, Failure to Launch, popular movies, but they're entertaining and humorous, but the repetition of such messaging is character destroying to males. And then you throw in what we're dealing with today, porn exposure and availability at way too young an age, video game addiction, legalization of marijuana, and now gender dysphoria. What do you have? You have a perfect recipe to wipe out a generation of the young American male. And then you contrast that with what I grew up with, saying the scout oath solemnly, it's like, I will do my best to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. That's a huge gulf, from where I grew up and what they're having to deal with today.
In such a short span of time also.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is just the access to information also.
Right.
Not all the information that's out there is correct, but when people read it, they tend to think, oh, I saw it on the internet, it must be true.
Well, and again, they're without a dad. You used to go, well, dad, and if he's not there, and there are things that teenage boys don't want to go ask their mom.
Right.
That's why a boy without a man is like an explorer without a map. A mom, boy, everybody needs a mom, but they can't raise men. And it takes men to raise men.
Now, the subtitle of your book is A Memoir of Modern Masculinity. I've never heard of modern masculinity. Did you coin that phrase?
I did. Sherry, for most of human history, up until the Industrial Revolution in the 1900s, so really just a little over 100 years ago, all of human history, a boy grew up working beside his father, either in agriculture, farming, or apprenticing in the family trade. So he was spending every day training with his father. Mm. And at least in America, most also were taught Christian principles and values. Mm-hmm. So modern masculinity, which is contemporary, I would, let's say from 1960, from my time forward, we have to recognize that toxic macho behavior exists and are mostly a result of boys acting out due to a lack of this previously, what was considered standard training from their fathers. Mm-hmm. So today, we have to admit that many fathers and families are failing society in this regard. So young men they're incomplete, they're unprepared, and that makes them angry. And so we grow up and you muddle through trying to hide your weaknesses and fears, and you repeat negative generational cycles like divorce or alcoholism because people are medicating pain that they don't properly process or fears. And, the alternative to that is, to turn to our faith and pray for supernatural wisdom. And that is where, these three things, is finding the will to obey is so important. You really have to do that. If you're going to be in self-will, you could definitely be on the path toward that toxic masculinity. But if you want to be positive, healthy, affirming, a good father, a good husband, a good citizen, you need to go and fill that gap that you didn't get. And you have to get that. It's wisdom. And with that wisdom, we become more self-aware of our gaps and seek healthy ways to close them and end the negative generational cycles. And that's basically what my story is like, okay, now that I'm an adult, now that I've made these mistakes and I'm halfway through my adult life, when am I going to really take that hard look at myself and go, okay, you can't blame it on your parents anymore. It's time to just find out, which will to obey, which work you're going to do and which woman you're going to love.
You reminded me of that saying I heard that youth is wasted on the young or something like that.
Yes, it is.
If I had known then what I know now, but
wisdom. Oh yeah, we're all need wisdom.
Right. So in our current society, is there a way to reverse what's happening? How do we get to modern masculinity today?
Well, I believe it's through surrendering our will to follow God's will. And that's kind of where we've deviated. And that's the story in my book. When I was going down my wilderness path and I was in his will, man, things were going good. Mm-hmm. Even I thought, they were going good because of my own talent, my own work, or my own effort. But it really, I believe, I was being blessed because I was, practicing my faith. And when I deviated from that, that's when I got lost. That's when I got off my map. That's when I'm out, off the trail, in the brambles. So it's easily correctable. And I think that, through the cycles of human history, there's patterns. If you look at the Old Testament, the Jews were very stiff-necked, very stubborn people, and then they would rebel, and then, mm-hmm. They'd have to deal with their consequences, and then they'd return, to the faith. So I think that's really the key. And then I think, young men need to take a look at themselves once they become men, and they're kind of like, okay, well, I didn't have my dad, or I can't really change that, but what am I going to do now as a mature adult to seek out older men who are willing to mentor, a hungry generation of, younger men. And I believe there's a real opportunity right now because, with all the diversity and inclusion that I saw in corporate America that's really prevalent now, mm-hmm. a lot of the older 55 plus men who kind of sought, career advancement almost to the detriment of their families are kind of being dismissed. The baby boomers aren't in charge anymore, man. Everybody's marketing and advertising toward that next generation, and they're being pushed out of corporate America, and they're, we're healthier, we're living longer, and they're like, wow, I have a little regret maybe about not being there for my kids. But if there's somebody else out there, a young man who wants what I have to offer, it can really be meaningful to me. It can be significance for me to to mentor that young man. And there's plenty of young men who are out there who want that. And so it's a matter of trying to match up those guys. And that's why I have a podcast to reach that younger audience. And then I'm on this AM conservative talk radio to reach older guys and try to connect them up.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Matching the two up. How is that working?
Well, so there's an organization called Better Man that I've been involved with. It's been through a couple of iterations. Initially, it was called Men's Fraternity, and they didn't like the fraternity connotation of the word. And then it became Man to Man, and now it's called Better Man. And it's just a fantastic program, and it's exactly for that. It's just an 11-week program. You can go to the betterman.org website, and I have facilitated this 4 or 5 times. And man, it is really hitting the mark with these young men. And it's down to like an 11-week course. Then you get this card and, what are your 3 upgrades, to be a better man? Because everybody really wants to be a better man. Every guy sitting in prison right now wants to be a better man, a better dad, but he didn't have a good model.
Yeah.
So it's just, when are you going to say, okay, I'm going to look for a new model? And so that organization, I can't speak highly enough about. And in my book, I talk about taking my sons, this Christ and the Tetons father-son experience. And, we would go paragliding one day, and then in the evening we'd have, a seminar format on the biblical definition of manhood. So it'd be like rejecting passivity. And then the next day we go whitewater rafting on the Snake River. And then, we'd be in that seminar format again, we're talking about, right, leading courageously. And then, so you do this high adventure, and, we had this father's blessing where really, it's just in the traditional, like, Jacob blessing his sons. Boys don't get that anymore, but man, to do that formally and in front of a group, and just to put your hands on your son's shoulders, hey, I love you because, I'm proud of you because, I think you have what it takes to be man because, and just finish those sentences, just is like watching them be inflated in front of you.
Wow, that's goosebump material right there.
It is, man.
Yeah.
I've experienced. That's why I want to share this.
Yeah. So would you say your book is just for men? Are there
Certainly
a variety?
not.
Okay.
So I wrote it to men, and I didn't know what to expect. There is a lot of cancel culture out there. People that are ready to go and get in your yard with the pitchforks and the torches, and So I was kind of expecting, just by the title, to have a little bit of a backlash or to have, some negative from women. But I wrote it humorously. I wrote it humbly. I wrote it very honestly and sincerely about, real painful moments. And I can't believe how well it's been received by women. That's probably the most surprising thing to me. Wow. Is how many women, because this is what my previous publishing assistant told me. She goes, look, a man writes a book about coming of age, manhood experiences, manhood struggles. Women want to read it because they want to understand men. Women write books and they know that men are never going to understand women. So we don't buy them or read them.
Well, I think just coming from my perspective, I would pick it up and read it just from the title alone. So I think the title is amazing because it's like, well, I want to find out what modern masculinity is, I mean, that's what makes you curious.
Good. That's the hook that you have to begin with on any book.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about your feedback from women. Your book has been out for a little over a year now. Can you tell us about some of the other feedback you've received?
Well, it's been fantastic. I have had so many people that I worked with that basically read it in one sitting. I was so
really
impressed and surprised, at how impactful it was from men of all ages, so my age, a lot of men who are fathers now, and I think a lot of women, because that's just my peer group. I'm 61. So, we've all got adult children, so I have 4 children, 1 daughter, 3 sons. The youngest son's 30. My daughter's 32, and I got a 33 and a 35-year-old. So, they're choosing their mates, and we're kind of all wanting them to choose wisely, and we want them to have successful marriages. We don't want them to go through divorces, especially if you've been through one like I have.
Right.
And so it's been tremendous. But I would say probably my most surprising, with women is some really want to know because they're trying to raise their sons because they just have a dad who's checked out. who's not really doing anything, and they're trying, moms are they're always going to be there. They're the rock who never leaves their son, even if he's in jail on death row, they're there. He's innocent, and so, they're really trying to help these sons that are struggling, like that Failure to Launch movie where he's still in the basement. He's still playing video games. He's 28, 29, 30. He won't go get a job. He's smoking pot. There's a lot of people like that out there. And I mean, it's tragic.
Yeah.
What I'm probably most surprised at is the number of young women who are just shooting the lights out. My daughter is one, she graduated from Baylor, and she's got a great job and a great career. And actually, she was living in Austin. Her first job was with Schlotsky's, and she was the marketing manager for like 25 of the stores over a multi-state area.
Oh, wow.
And she said that, this was like the dream job. Everybody in Waco was like, oh, you got a job and your office is Schlotsky's headquarters on 5th Street in Austin. And it's perfect. And everybody that, she would try to go out on a date with were these guys who were musicians who, wouldn't buy him a drink or dinner, and were just kind of wanting a mom to take care of them, and she was just like, I can't find anybody that's even in that pool of husband prospect. And this is a big issue for young women. I don't think they talk about it enough, but they're almost like giving up. And that's why there's a lot of women who are just like, well, I'm just going to have, I don't need another kid. I'll just raise the one that I have without the adult child, that comes along with it, that's looking for another mommy. It's really a widespread problem. And if you look at the graduation rates, the college enrollment rates, young men are falling behind badly in every measurable way. And so I think it goes back to a lot of the marijuana, video games, porn, trifecta. And if that gets to them when they're early and young, in their preteens even, you really don't have a chance. And I don't know what I would have been like if I had to deal with those temptations with no help.
Yeah.
I had to go steal a Playboy magazine, from a rack. When it just wasn't available. And so your brain and your body could kind of mature without this early interference on it. And then it's just so available out there. It's really pervasive.
It is. And it's available to younger and younger age groups too, it seems like. They're going to find a way.
Right.
It's so easy.
It is. It's just, and they're so much more agile on their phones and tablets and things. And so it's...
Oh, yeah, then we are, for sure.
Oh, yes, for sure. That's who I call for tech support. My kids.
Exactly. Oh, my goodness. Is there any one transformational story that kind of stands out to you?
Well, the answer is yes for me. And this is kind of like the biggest thing I learned, is that finding a woman to love is where I had the biggest gap in my own life due to the divorces in my own family. I really didn't get much advice from my dad, and I wondered about that. But my dad's father died when he was 12 or 13, so he never got it. So I guess he didn't feel equipped to give it. And so I was just a fool when I was young. And, all this divorce in my family really had a huge impact on me. And I was just like, I'm never going to get married. I'm just not going to get married. Mm-hmm. But I'm also a human, and I'm a sexual being, and and I'm like, well, I want to be with women, And so, unfortunately, I didn't have a proper criteria and coaching, and I got married, but there were lots of red flags that I ignored. My ex-wife was a good mother and a good person, but we were not properly matched. So I was kind of ambushed, with divorce papers. I wasn't expecting it or wanted it at all. Once I got married, I would have done anything, to hang in there, but that wasn't an option. And so then after that, I was like even more angry, with women. And I was like, no, I'm never getting married again for sure this time. And I prayed a lot about that. And I had to kind of surrender all that. And I realized that I was wired by God to be married. That the best possible version of me was in a partnership through marriage, and that rather than run from marriage in fear, due to the divorces in my family, I needed to intentionally seek a wife with a criteria for what I believe to be a great marriage. Mm-hmm. And that's a big transformational step. And that was the word, that you used in the question.
Yeah.
And so on my podcast, I have, it's called Wrestling with the Inner Man. If you want to learn more about that specific transformational story, there's a very funny series that we call Charm School. There's 4 episodes. It's on Apple and Spotify. And I make a promise to young men. It's like, hey, if you want to be ahead of 75% of all the other guys, no matter how much money they have, no matter how good looking they are. But if you're intentional and you say, I want to get married, I have a plan for how I'm going to find and win the woman I love and how to keep her happy once I marry her. That's very attractive to all women.
Yeah.
And so those 4 episodes are about that, with some specific examples on how I landed the jackpot lotto winning wife that I have now.
That's awesome. So how would you recommend readers use your book as a resource?
It is a resource, and that's why, when you self-publish, you get that opportunity to put an appendix in there, and I put a study guide in the back, for each chapter. And then so a small group of men could get together and go, okay, here's this chapter 1, courageous, what, and then there's questions and a Bible verse, on questions about being courageous. And then, so that's one way. I also read a lot. So if you don't have a group, there were a lot of books that I read, and I just became a student, and I kind of went through a lot of books, and I really winnowed it down to this excellent collection of books. There's one called Every Man's Battle, which is about, sexual temptation. It's just a fantastic resource. And there's, how you raise your kids, their teens, about that. And there's many, many books that are listed in there. And then just a plug on March 8th, I'm doing a relaunch of my book digitally, and I'll offer free digital copies of the book on Amazon for 5 days.
Wonderful.
And
yeah.
I've also added this freebie. So if you go and you download the book and you read it, or, at the very beginning of the introduction, there's a teachable moment movie recommendations, which I use with my own sons. And you need to just sign up for my email list, and then you can get that, because when you don't have custody of your kids, I became extremely strategic about how I wanted to parent. And so I used movies that I would watch, and then I would okay, I'll get them to watch this movie, and we're just watching a movie together. And then I kind of start asking them questions about the character in the movie, which are really things that I want to teach them. And it was very, very effective.
Wow. Very creative too.
Yeah.
So you have a podcast. You talked about that. Do you have any other resources available on your website for readers if they want to take their journey a little bit further?
Well, what I'm considering is actually doing, I mentioned this Christ in the Tetons program, but basically like a week camping trip with fathers and sons. And I'm still working on where I would do that. So I would just say, stay tuned on that, because there's an outfit in Colorado, actually not far from Durango. And my wife and I went there and kind of checked it out on this fall couples retreat. And it's called Voice of Wilderness. And they have a lodge and they have permits. And so I'm trying to actually work a deal with them. So I've got the place to stage out of, and then lead this kind of father-son and kind of talk about all these principles when you're out hiking. You got all the phones, everything's gone, and, you got to, sweat a little, cook, fish, do things like that.
Right.
And then I'll plug a couple of other episodes. So we have about 40 episodes up on the podcast now. So we began last June. And besides the Charm School series, we did a series on the 7 deadly sins today, which I think people might find very interesting. And then I did another one, a show called Escaping the Matrix, because of the new Matrix Resurrections movie and artificial intelligence, and how the gaming industry is using gambling casino techniques to basically make these kids addicted to these games. And so
right.
Escaping the Matrix is one. This show Yellowstone is extremely popular. I don't know. Are you familiar with that show?
I have heard of it. Yeah.
So Kevin Costner is like this huge, patriarchal figure. And that episode is called Yellowstone Dads, where, I'm talking about the importance of a father and making references, parallels with the show. And I think that's another way to kind of connect with people on more, modern pop culture things, but then I give my spin on it.
Okay, yeah, my son was actually just telling me about that series this weekend when I saw him and his
Yeah, I
family.
tell them to go check out Yellowstone Dads.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the most important piece of advice you feel you could give to young men today?
So I would say you have to acknowledge your gaps and your fears to other men. You are not alone, and that's I think what's happened in this Facebook social media world. And my son told me about this TED talk that he watched where they were talking about primates, and you could only have a group of 50, and then these monkeys break off and they create another group, and and so you have this group, of Facebook friends, of 500 people, and then you go post all the good things that are happening in your life, and when you have a bad day, you're not posting about it, and so you've kind of fabricated a false picture of yourself out there to the world,
Right.
and that means there's a little bit more of a gap between the real you and the Facebook you, and that grows. It grows to the point where no one knows the real you, and you get lonelier and lonelier. And I think that's what's really causing more of these suicides and things. And so you need friends. And
Yeah.
I've been super blessed with lifelong friends and many friends and friends all over the world. And I'm good at that, and I nurture those relationships. And I have, like, the ski trip that I went on. I've been skiing with these guys for 30 years.
That's
I've been
amazing.
backpacking with a different group for 25 years. I have fraternity brothers from college that I still am in touch with and golf with. And so, man, just nurture those friendships, because they know you, they know your warts, and your flaws. And you can just talk about that, around a campfire and go, man, I'm really struggling with this. And, what I think of it as like shining a light, on the dust bunny under the bed, help shrink the monster that you feared was living there.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of expose it to the light and to truth.
I would imagine one of the problems that young people have, men and women today, is actually making real friends. Everyone is so focused on how many Facebook friends they have, and those aren't real friends. I don't know how hard it is to make friends as a
I
young
think it's
person today, but I think it's hard.
I think it's real hard, Sherry, because it's not face to face, and this pandemic has made it even worse.
Right.
We're all isolated. We're all masks. You can't even read people's facial expressions. You're losing these basic skills that even animals have. And so I think there's another podcast that I would recommend called, The Art of Manliness, and there was a great interview he did about how to make a friend. And you're like, are you kidding? We need to have a lesson on how to make a friend and nurture a friend. Well, it's
Yes.
terrific. The psychologist from the University of Kansas, and he was great. But I think, especially because of the pandemic, people are like my daughter, she was the one who drew me into texting, and I hated texting. I'm like, well, just call me.
Right.
No. I said, why don't you want to call? With this texting, we can avoid those awkward pauses in conversation, because then you say, okay, goodbye, and you hang up. But everybody's always trying to outdo one another with a clever response, or maybe they're even punishing you, making you wait a little bit. This is what we experience with our children, right? and so there's response, and so you're interpreting all these things that are nonverbal communication, and then it just becomes like you just start texting, and then you quit talking. You just text all the time, or you email, and it's poor communication because so much can be misinterpreted, and we're already at a disadvantage there, just between genders and generations.
Right, exactly. Yeah. What's next for you? Do you have plans to write another book?
I have another book in mind that's actually would kind of follow the Savage Path, and it would be a contrast between the blaze. So when you're hiking in the mountains and there's snow and it's like you can't see the trail on the ground, there's a blaze, it's on a tree. And I think of Christ as being the blaze. He's always going to show me the way. But then you've got Satan, who's got the maze. He wants you to get lost in the maze and just waste your life running around dead ends, just with distraction. And so I had a ton of content, and I'm a prolific storyteller and joke teller. And so I think I could write another book right now, the podcast is a lot of effort and time. I'm trying to get that off the ground,
Right.
and I'll see kind of where that goes. And then if I get this camp established, my wife's not going to let me continue to spend money because I think I'm an author. I need to sell some books. And so, that's why I really appreciate Read Reviews and what you do to help a self-published author like me, get some air and some oxygen. So I really appreciate your service.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add today?
Go check out the website. Check out Wrestling with the Inner Man podcast on Apple or Spotify. And then, the email is wrestlingwiththeinnerman@gmail.com for anybody who's got any ideas or wants us to do shows on some other topic, because there's no limit to the things that we wrestle with. That we have an introduction of the show and it says Wrestling with the Inner Man, and then we have this round bell like a fight, like ding, ding, ding.
Right.
Because the first fight we face each day is the fight between our sinful nature and our divine nature. Are we going to listen to our selfish sinful nature or the Holy Spirit divine nature? And you're battling that, just on a daily basis, every day when you get up.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing a little bit about yourself and your work. We appreciate it.
All right, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today for my interview with David L. Savage, author of The Savage Path, a memoir of modern masculinity. You can learn more about David and his work by visiting his website at thesavagepath.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.